I just faced my own worst nightmare. The HOA president's crew rolled up and started building on my ranch without any warning. And her reason? She said that they had a permit and that I should leave. Funny thing is, the only thing approved that day was their exit when we showed up armed and ready for a fight. Let me start from the beginning. My name is Ethan Hayes. Some folks around here in the Texas Hill Country think I'm quiet. They're not wrong. I spent enough years overseas where being loud got you noticed by the wrong people. You learn to be still. You learn to watch. And you learn that most problems don't start with a bang. They start with a smile. The kind of smile Victoria Vance wore like a weapon. The kind that says, I own this room, and by the time I'm done, I'll own you too. But on this particular Tuesday, the smiling was over. It was replaced by the deep, gut-rumbling growl of a D9 Caterpillar bulldozer. I stood on the porch, coffee mug in hand, and watched it tear into the South Oak Belt. My oak belt. My granddad planted those trees 80 years ago. He said they were the ranch's southern wall, a line of living sentinels against the wind and the sun. Now, they were falling like matchsticks. Ranger, my dog, let out a low whine from beside me, his body rigid. He knew. Animals always know when a line has been crossed. A fresh plywood sign faced the road, Future Oak Creek Ranch Clubhouse. On my side, a sun-bleached red plate read, Private Ranch. No trespassing. I took a slow sip of coffee. It was still hot. The sun was just a sliver of orange over the hills, painting the dust cloud from the dozer a dirty, apocalyptic red. I could see the crew, maybe 5 or 6 guys in hard hats, moving around the carnage. Standing off to the side, next to a black SUV, 2 men in matching navy jackets and a female site inspector in a blue HOA shirt hovered by the SUV. A fire road. Keep clear. A placard leaned on a cone. Their truck blocked it anyway. They had earpieces. They had that stiff, self-important posture of hired muscle, trying to look professional. Victoria's new safety team. I'd heard about them. Their job was to ensure HOA project compliance. Funny, their jurisdiction ended about a half-mile back, right where my property line starts. A line that was clearly marked, a line that was now being violated by about 100 tons of moving steel. I finished my coffee and set the mug down on the railing. Calm. That's what the situation required. The anger was there, a cold, hard knot in my gut. But anger is fuel. You don't spill it. You use it. I went back inside. Clara was at the kitchen island, a tablet propped up in front of her. She was already dressed. She looked up, her eyes asking the question she didn't need to speak. They started, I said. She nodded once. Comms are hot. Mike, Leo, and Ben are 5 minutes out. The body cams are recording and streaming to the server. So are the dash cams. Everything is triple redundant. Clara runs comms like she was born to it. Fast, efficient, no wasted motion. She had the medkit by the door, our Cessna keys on the counter, and a drone controller sitting next to the tablet. She wasn't just my wife, she was my force multiplier. Kids okay? I asked. Lily is teaching Aunt Sophia how to beat her at chess. Jack is probably trying to ride one of her goats. They're fine. Sending them away was the hardest part, but this wasn't a game, and our kids, Lily and Jack, weren't going to be pawns in it. A text pinged on my phone. Mike, at the gate. I walked to the gun safe, the big one in my office. My granddad's old Winchester was in there, but that wasn't what I reached for. I pulled my 12-gauge pump, checked the action, and slid a shell carrier on the stock. The AR stayed in the safe. Legal, on my own property, entirely justified. My crew were all Marines. We served together. We came home together. They were more brothers than friends. They showed up at my ranch a few years back, looking for work, looking for peace. We found it here. Or we had. When they rolled up the drive in Mike's old pickup, they weren't smiling. They were kitted out just like me, each with a camera rolling. We didn't look like a bunch of angry ranchers. We looked like a fire team. Methodical. Purposeful. We loaded into my truck. Ranger jumped into the back seat, his head resting between me and Mike. No barking, just a quiet, steady presence. We drove down the dirt road toward the South Belt. I could see the confusion on the faces of the construction crew as we approached. They slowed their work. The 2 Navy jackets, the safety team, stepped forward, puffing their chests out. They tried to block the road with their bodies. I just kept driving, slow and steady, until the grill of my truck was inches from their belt buckles. They took a step back. I killed the engine and we got out, fanning out in a loose line. We didn't say a word. We just stood there, for men armed on our own land, letting the cameras roll. I kept the muzzle down, low ready, legal carry. A woman in a blue HOA shirt, clipboard, and patch spun on her heel and ran. A young laborer dropped his clipboard and bolted, tears cutting tracks in the dust. Another blue shirt compliance guy stumbled after them, yelling into his radio. The lead safety guy, a beefy dude with a shaved head, finally found his voice. "This is a private construction site. You need to leave." I almost laughed. "You're on Hayes land," I said, my voice flat. "That dozer is about 300 yards past my property line. You're the ones who need to leave. Now." He smirked. "We're operating under the authority of the Oak Creek Ranches HOA. We have a permit." "Your authority ends at the fence you just tore down," I said. "And a permit to build a clubhouse doesn't give you the right to trespass and destroy private property." I held up my phone, which was also recording. "Everything you're doing is being documented." The fence post cam stared past a 24/7 surveillance sticker. No one could say they didn't see it. "Every tree you've cut down, every word you're saying, it's all going to a lawyer. It's all going to the sheriff." His smirk faltered. He looked at his partner. He looked at my crew. He looked at my shotgun. No aiming, no threats, just on-camera presence. He was doing the math. It wasn't adding up in his favor. The construction workers had all stopped now, watching us, keeping their distance. They were just guys trying to earn a paycheck. They weren't the problem. The problem was the woman who signed their checks. The problem was Victoria Vance. Finally, the hired muscle pulled out his phone. He was calling his boss. Or maybe he was calling for backup. It didn't matter. We weren't going anywhere. We stood there in the quiet morning. The only sounds were the ticking of my cooling engine and the distant cry of a hawk. The air smelled of diesel and freshly butchered oak. It was the smell of a war I never wanted, but a war I was damn sure going to finish. That's when I heard the siren, faint at first, then growing louder. Sheriff Frank Miller was on his way. Stage 1 was complete. Sheriff Frank Miller's cruiser kicked up a plume of dust as it rolled to a stop. Frank is a good man, but he's a tired man. He's been sheriff of this county for 20 years, and he's seen it all. He climbed out of the car, adjusting his belt, and took in the scene. For armed men on one side, 2 wannabe bodyguards and a bewildered construction crew on the other, and a battlefield of dead oak trees in the middle. He sighed. It was the sigh of a man who just wanted to finish his coffee in peace. "Ethan," he said, nodding to me. "Victoria." He didn't need to say her full name. We all knew. He walked over to the lead security guy. "Let me see this permit." The guy, trying to look important again, handed over a tablet. Frank looked at it, swiped a few times, and then looked at me. "Says here, the HOA has an easement for a new community recreational facility." I shook my head. "No, they don't. Not on my land. Look at the county plat, Frank. The official one, not the one she's showing you." This whole mess started about a year after my granddad passed away. He was the one who helped found this community. He sold off small parcels of the original ranch to families who wanted a piece of the hill country. He set up the original homeowners association himself. It was for road maintenance and trash pickup. Simple, neighborly. Then Victoria Vance arrived. She came from some big city, bought the largest lot, and immediately started a campaign of charm and promises. She was smart, I'll give her that. She talked about increasing property values, about bringing in new amenities. She hosted wine and cheese nights. She remembered everyone's name. In 6 months, she was elected HOA president. And then the smiling stopped and the rules began. Rules about the color you could paint your mailbox. Rules about what kind of trees you could plant. It was about control. All of it. My grandpa, he was a man of handshakes and his word. He kept his records in old ledgers. When he died, everything was a bit of a mess. I was still overseas on my last tour. My aunt was the executor, and she did her best, but she was overwhelmed. Somewhere in that chaotic transition, a new plat map for the community was filed with the county. It looked almost identical to the old one. Almost. Except for a tiny dotted line that appeared, granting a utility and access easement, right through my South Oak belt. It was a forgery. A damn good one, but a forgery nonetheless. By the time I got home, got my feet under me, and started going through the paperwork, the forged map was already buried under a year of official acceptance. When I pointed it out, the HOA, led by Victoria, just smiled and said it was a clerical error in my favor that was finally corrected. They said my granddad had verbally promised it years ago. A lie. My granddad loved those oaks more than some people love their own children. He would never have given that land up. Victoria's real prize wasn't a clubhouse. It was water. Our ranch sits on top of a sweet spot in the aquifer. Coyote Creek runs right through it. In a part of Texas where water rights are more valuable than gold, she wanted our well. The spa she was planning to build as part of her new community center was just a cover. It would have its own deep wells, sucking the water table dry. And because of the forged easement, it would all look perfectly legal. She needed this project. It was flashy, a big win. The kind of thing you put on a brochure when you run for county commissioner, which was her real endgame. Power. She craved it. She was laundering the HOA's money into this project, a project that was supposed to be her stepping stone to real influence. I knew it. But knowing and proving are two different things. That's why we were so prepared. The ranch isn't just a home. It's a fortress, but a quiet one. After I came back, I poured my energy into it. We have motion-activated cameras covering all the approaches. We have infrared tripwires on the fences. Clara can launch a thermal drone and see a jackrabbit from 500 feet up, day or night. We have our own power, our own water, our own comms. And we have a dirt airstrip long enough for our little Cessna. My granddad built it to fly in supplies. I kept it maintained. Some people thought I was paranoid. My buddies, Mike, Leo, and Ben, they understood. You don't spend years in a war zone and come home thinking the world is a safe place. You come home understanding that you have to make your own safety. You build your walls, you watch your perimeter, and you prepare for the day when the fight comes to you. Frank handed the tablet back to the security guy. This plat doesn't match the one on file at my office. The one on file shows this land, he said, pointing a thumb at the downed trees, belongs to Ethan Hayes. Free and clear, no easement. The security guy's face went pale. So you're trespassing. And that, Frank said, gesturing to the bulldozer, is destruction of private property. Pack it up. All of it. Get your equipment and your people off this ranch right now. I want this site cleared in 1 hour. He looked at me. Ethan, you and your boys stand down. Let them leave. I nodded and gestured to my crew. We lowered our weapons, and without a word, we got back in the truck. Half the site had already scattered the moment we showed up armed. The rest packed fast once Frank gave the order. We drove back to the house and watched from the porch as the construction crew scrambled to get their equipment loaded. The two security guys stood there looking lost. Their authority had vanished. For now, we'd won. But I knew Victoria. This wasn't over. This was a tactical retreat for her. She had been publicly embarrassed. Her project was stalled. A woman like that doesn't just walk away. She escalates. And I knew, as I watched them go, that the next move would be quieter and a lot dirtier. The quiet lasted for 2 days. It was a tense, heavy silence, the kind that feels like a held breath. We used the time to reinforce everything. Mike and Leo walked the entire fence line, checking for new cuts or markers. Ben did a sweep with a bug detector around the main house and the barn, just in case Victoria's goons had gotten more ambitious than we thought. Nothing. It was too clean. Clara kept the drone up in rotating shifts, its eye in the sky watching the roads, watching the treeling. Ranger stuck to my side like a shadow, his ears twitching at every gust of wind. The kids were safe at my sister Sophia's place, 2 counties over. Clara talked to them every night, putting on a brave, cheerful voice. I could hear the strain in it. She was holding it together for all of us. I spent most of my time in the office on the phone with my lawyer, sending him the video files, the pictures of the damage, the property deeds. He was confident. It's a slam-dunk case for damages, Ethan. But a woman like this, she's not going to be stopped by a lawsuit. Be careful. I didn't need him to tell me that. The escalation came on the 3rd night. It started subtly. Around dusk, Clara called me into the kitchen. She was pointing at the monitor that showed the feed from the camera on the main gate. A big white panel truck with the HOA logo on the side was parked across our fire road, completely blocking it. They're not on our property, she said. They're on the public access road, but it's the only way a fire truck or an ambulance could get to us. It was a classic siege tactic. Cut off your enemy's lines of supply and retreat. A few minutes later, another identical truck pulled up and blocked the road from the other direction. They parked beside an orange board that read, County Burn Ban in Effect. Irony bright as a flare. We were boxed in. My jaw tightened. This was a direct, unmistakable threat. I got on the phone to Frank Miller. "They're blocking the fire road, Frank. Both ends." I could hear the weariness in his voice. "I'll send a deputy out, Ethan. But if they're on the public right-of-way, there's not much I can do besides ask them to move." He knew, and I knew, that they wouldn't move unless forced. Then, at exactly 8:15 p.m., the lights flickered and died. The hum of the refrigerator, the glow of the monitors, everything went silent. The power was out. I stood in the sudden, deep darkness of the house. For a moment, there was nothing. Then a low hum started from the barn, and the emergency lights in the kitchen flickered on, casting a dim, sterile glow. The generator had kicked in automatically. Clara was already moving. "Power's out for the whole grid, not just us," she said, tapping at her satellite-linked tablet. "Cell tower is down, too. Looks like a transformer blew a few miles up the road." Coincidence? I didn't believe in them. Not anymore. Victoria was isolating us. No power, no phones, no way in or out. She was trying to make us feel helpless, cut off from the world. She was trying to make us panic. But panic isn't in our vocabulary. My crew and I, we'd operated in places where there was no grid, no cell service, no cavalry coming over the hill. This was just another Tuesday. "Mike, Leo," I said into my radio, which worked on our own closed frequency, status. Mike's voice came back calm and clear. "All good here, Ethan. Generator is running. We've got eyes on the west perimeter. Ben's watching the east." Ben chimed in. "That panel truck on my side has 2 guys in it. They're just sitting there, watching." They weren't trying to be subtle. They wanted us to know they were there. It was psychological. They were turning our sanctuary into a cage. I joined Clara at the kitchen island. She had the drone feed up. With the power out across the valley, the world outside our small circle of generator-powered light was pitch black. She switched the drone camera to thermal. The landscape transformed into a ghostly world of blacks, whites, and grays. The warm shapes of deer moved through the woods. The 2 HOA trucks glowed with the heat of their engines. Everything looked alien, predatory. "What's the plan, Ethan?" Clara asked quietly. She wasn't scared. She was processing, calculating, ready for orders. "We stay put," I said. "We watch, we wait. They're trying to spook us. They want us to do something rash, something stupid. They want us to come out and confront them so they can claim we're the aggressors." My grandpa used to tell me stories about the old days, about range wars fought over water and fences. He said, "The man who wins isn't the one who's quickest on the draw. He's the one who's steadiest, the one who outlasts the other guy." That's what we had to do. We had the supplies. We had the power. We had the eyes. Victoria Vance could cut the lines and block the roads, but she couldn't touch us in here. She thought she was laying a siege, but she didn't understand our capabilities. She was a bully used to people folding. She didn't know how to fight people who wouldn't break. I put my hand over Clara's on the cool countertop, her fingers laced with mine. "They're just testing the fences," I said. "Let them. We're ready." Outside, the wind picked up, rattling the windows. Ranger got up, walked to the door, and sniffed at the crack. He let out a single low growl. He could sense it, too. The night was young, and our unwelcome guests were just getting started. The first real probe came just after midnight. Clara was making a fresh pot of coffee when a small, almost imperceptible icon blinked red on her screen. "Tripwire," she said, her voice dropping a half octave. "North fence line, near the old barn." I was by her side in a second. She tapped the screen, and the main display switched from the drone's high-altitude view to the feed from a motion-activated camera hidden in a post oak. The image was grainy, captured in the eerie green-white of infrared, but it was clear enough. A man dressed in dark clothes and a ski mask was crouched by the fence. He wasn't cutting it. He was carefully placing a small, heavy-looking canvas bag just inside my property line. He was clumsy, hurried, and amateur. He kept looking over his shoulder as if he expected the hounds of hell to descend on him at any moment. He finished his work, gave one last nervous look around, and scurried back into the darkness. I watched the screen, my face impassive. The knot in my stomach tightened, but my hands were steady. He was planting something. Drugs, illegal weapons, something they could anonymously tip the sheriff off about in the morning, something to give Frank Miller a reason to come through my gate with a search warrant and tear my place apart. It was a classic frame-up, crude, desperate, but potentially effective if we weren't careful. I've got him on thermal, Clara said, her fingers flying across her own tablet. She brought the drone feed up on a split screen. We could see the man's heat signature, a bright, white figure retreating through the woods towards the road. We watched him link up with a second figure, and then both of them moved back towards one of the blockading trucks. My crew was already on the radio. "Ethan, you seeing this?" Mike asked. His voice was laced with contempt. "Yeah, we see it," I replied. "Sit tight. Nobody engages. Let them think they're clear." The instinct is always to act, to go out there, run them down, and deliver some very direct, physical feedback. That's the instinct of a soldier. But I wasn't just a soldier anymore. I was a landowner, a husband, a father. The fight had to be won on different terms. It had to be won with evidence. It had to be won in a way that left no doubt, no ambiguity. It had to be won in a way that would utterly destroy Victoria Vance's credibility and her political ambitions. Revenge is a hot meal. Justice is a cold, calculated dish served on a platter of irrefutable proof. "They're sloppy," Ben's voice crackled over the comms. "They left tracks all over the place. Their heat signatures are lighting up the woods. This is Bush League." He was right. These weren't professionals. They were thugs Victoria had probably hired for cheap, guys who thought this was just some simple intimidation job. They had no idea they were walking into a fully operational surveillance grid. They were actors on a stage they didn't know was lit, performing for an audience of cameras. For the next hour, we just watched. We tracked the two men back to their truck. We recorded their movements. We saved every frame of video from every angle. Clara logged the exact time of the tripwire breach, the exact coordinates of the planted bag, the thermal track of the intruders. It was a mountain of digital evidence, all time-stamped and securely stored on a cloud server they couldn't possibly touch. The temptation to go out and retrieve the bag was strong, to see what they'd planted, but that would mean disturbing the scene. It would mean putting my fingerprints on their evidence. No, the better play was to leave it. Let it sit there like a little landmine of their own making. Let them call the sheriff. Let them spring their own trap. We would simply show Frank the footage of it being planted. The frame-up would become an exhibit for the prosecution. I leaned back in my chair and took a deep breath. The coffee Clara had made was ready. She poured me a cup. Her hand was steady. Her eyes met mine over the rim of the mug. There was a quiet fire in them. She hated this, hated the violation, the threat to our home. But she understood the strategy. She was a part of it. We were a team. I took a sip of the coffee. It was black and strong. "Get some rest," I told her. "I'll take the watch with the guys for a few hours." She shook her head. "I'm not tired." We sat there in the low glow of the monitors, the silent sentinels of our own fortress, watching the night unfold. The house was quiet. The generator hummed its steady, reassuring rhythm. Outside, in the dark, our enemies thought they had laid a clever trap. They had no idea they were the ones who were caught. We had them. We had the recording. It was clean. It was definitive. I should have felt a sense of victory, of relief. But I didn't. Instead, a cold dread was creeping up my spine. This felt too easy. A woman as smart and as ruthless as Victoria Vance wouldn't pin all her hopes on a simple, clumsy frame job. This was just a distraction. This was misdirection. The real attack, I felt certain, was still to come. The real attack began with a smell. A faint, acrid scent on the wind, like a distant barbecue gone wrong. Ranger, who had been sleeping at my feet, lifted his head, a low growl rumbling in his chest. I stood up and went to the back door. The wind had shifted. It was coming from the east now, blowing hard, carrying the smell of smoke. A lot of smoke. My blood went cold. I ran back to the kitchen where Clara was still monitoring the feeds. "The creek," I said. "Check the drone feed along the creek." Her fingers danced on the screen, directing the drone to the east, along the winding path of Coyote Creek. The thermal camera was still active. What we saw made my stomach drop. On the screen, a massive, angry white bloom of heat was erupting along the creek bed. It wasn't a campfire. It was a wildfire, and the wind was whipping it into a frenzy, pushing it west, straight towards us. "My God," Clara whispered. "They set a fire." The contraband plant, the blockade, the power outage, it all clicked into place. It was a coordinated, multi-layered attack. The contraband was supposed to get us tied up with the law. The blockade was to stop emergency services. The power outage was to cripple our communications and defenses. And the fire was the cleanup. It was the final, brutal solution. It was meant to destroy the evidence of the planted bag. It was meant to destroy the barn, the house, our home. It was meant to drive us out permanently. Victoria Vance wasn't just trying to win a property dispute anymore. This was attempted arson. This was a direct, life-threatening assault. They sent in a cleanup crew, I said, the pieces fitting together with sickening clarity. The guys who planted the bag, they went back, maybe to retrieve it, maybe to set the stage for the cops. And they started this. She told them to. It wouldn't be hard to make it look like an accident. A discarded cigarette, a faulty piece of equipment. With the high winds and the dry conditions, the whole county was a tinderbox. A burn ban had been in effect for weeks. To start a fire now wasn't just reckless. It was a profoundly malicious act. The drone footage showed the fire spreading with terrifying speed, devouring the dry grass and brush along the creek, leaping from juniper to oak. It was already a monster. Call 911. I snapped, even though I knew it was useless. Clara was already doing it on the satellite phone. I'm on with dispatch, she said, her voice tight. They've got multiple calls. The fire is visible from the highway, but they can't get to it. The road is blocked. They're trying to find an alternate route, but it will take time. Of course it would. Victoria had planned for that. The fire trucks were miles away, stuck behind her HOA compliance trucks. They were completely cut off. We were on our own. For a moment, the sheer scale of her depravity stunned me. This went so far beyond a grab for power and water rights. This was scorched earth warfare. She was willing to burn down a piece of the county, to risk lives, to win. Mike, Leo, Ben, I said into my radio, my voice hard as steel. We have a fire, east side, along the creek. It's moving fast. Get the water pump hooked up to the main tank. Start soaking the ground around the house and the barn. Move the vehicles to the airstrip. It's the clearest ground we have. The response was immediate. No questions. Just copy that. They were already moving. These were men who knew how to react in a crisis. Panic was a luxury we couldn't afford. The air in the house was already hazy. Through the window, I could see a hellish orange glow painting the underside of the smoke cloud that was boiling into the night sky. The roar was audible now, a constant, hungry sound like a freight train that never passed. The core question that had been nagging at the back of my mind for days came into sharp focus. How far will a man go to defend his own? I was about to find out. This was no longer about property lines or legal papers. This was about survival. My granddad built this ranch with his bare hands. He poured his life into this soil. He taught me to be a steward of this land, not just an owner. And a sociopath in a pantsuit was trying to burn it to the ground out of pure, venomous spite. I looked at Clara. Her face was illuminated by the ghastly light of the fire on the monitor. She was scared. I could see it in the tightness of her jaw. But she was also resolute. She was a fighter. We both were. Get the Cessna ready, I said. We might need to get out of here. Or we might need to get other people out. She nodded, already grabbing the keys. The fire was coming. But we were the Hazes, and this was our land. We don't run. We fight. The world outside had turned into a scene from a disaster movie. The sky was a churning nightmare of orange and black. Ash rained down like dirty snow, coating every surface. The roar of the fire was a physical presence, a deep vibration you could feel in your bones. My crew was working with grim efficiency, a hose spraying a wide arc of water onto the barn roof. The ground around the house was already dark and soaked, but it was like trying to stop a tidal wave with a garden hose. The fire was too big, too fast. The wind was its ally, pushing it forward relentlessly. We could save the buildings, maybe, but the land, the pastures, the trees, they were burning. My satellite phone buzzed. It was Frank Miller. His voice was strained, frantic. Ethan, we can't get to you. The road is blocked, and there's a wreck on the backup route. The whole volunteer fire department is tied up. You're on your own for at least another hour, maybe more. He paused, and I could hear the difficulty in his next words. We're getting reports. The construction crew, the one you had to run in with their camp, was right down by the creek, near the ignition point. We can't reach them. We don't know if they got out. My gut twisted. The guys in the hard hats, the ones who were just trying to do a job. Victoria had hired them, and now she had left them to die. She had blockaded the only road out, and then lit a fire at their backs. I looked at Clara. She had heard Frank's side of the conversation. Her eyes were wide. For a second, a flicker of pure, primal rage went through me. Let them burn. Let Victoria's whole rotten enterprise go up in smoke. But it passed as quickly as it came. The men in that camp weren't my enemy. They were victims, same as us. Pawns in her sick game. Leaving them there wasn't justice. It was just another atrocity. This was the crossroads. Do we hunker down and save ourselves, our property, our animals? Or do we take the insane risk of trying to help the very people who were part of the machine trying to crush us? But it wasn't a choice. Not for me. Not for Clara. You don't leave people behind. Not ever. It's a line you don't cross. Clara, I said, my voice steady. Get the plane in the air. She didn't hesitate. What's the mission? Recon first. Then rescue. I turned to the radio. Mike, Leo, Ben, change of plans. We're going after those workers. There was a beat of silence. Then Mike's voice came back. Where are they? Down by the creek, trapped between the fire and the bluffs. That's a hot zone, Ethan. I know. Another pause. All right. What do you need from us? That was my crew, my brothers. They knew the risks. They trusted my judgment. The plan came together in seconds, a desperate, crazy piece of battlefield improvisation. Clara would fly the Cessna. Her mission was to be our eye in the sky and, if necessary, our air ambulance. Our own drones, the small ones, would fly low under the smoke to pinpoint the exact location of the trapped men. I would take the truck and try to get as close as I could by land, using the fire road that ran along the ridge. My crew would stay behind to protect the ranch and provide support. It was a long shot, a stupidly dangerous gamble. We could lose the plane. We could lose the truck. We could lose our lives. But we were the only ones who could even try. Before Clara ran for the airstrip, she grabbed my arm. Ethan, what about the evidence? She meant the planted bag near the barn. The fire was moving in that direction. If it burned, our perfect frame-up evidence would be gone. Let it burn, I said without a second thought. People are more important than proof. In that moment, the legal fight, the property dispute, it all felt small, insignificant. This was about something more fundamental. It was about who we were. Were we the kind of people who let others perish to win a lawsuit? Or were we the kind of people who ran toward the fire? That's when my radio crackled with a voice I didn't expect. Breaker 19er, Coyote Creek Ranch. You got your ears on. It was a fuzzy, static-filled transmission. This is neighbor Walt, the voice said. Got a whole mess of folks in town listening to the scanner, watching the glow. We see your plane. What the hell is going on over there? Walt was a retired engineer who lived a few miles away. He was a ham radio fanatic, his house a forest of antennas. He was our link to the outside world. Walt, I said into my own radio, we're running a private rescue operation. The fire is blocking the roads. There are people trapped. I made a split-second decision. Clara, can you stream the drone feed? Already on it, she said, sending Walt the link. Walt, I said, I'm sending you a video link from our drones. Get it out there. Let the town see what's happening. Let them see why the fire department can't get through. I didn't know it then, but that decision would be more powerful than any piece of physical evidence. We were about to show the whole county, in real time, who was lighting the fires and who was flying into them. The airstrip was a surreal bubble of calm in a world of chaos. The ground was clear, the fire still a few hundred yards away, but the air was thick with smoke that stung the eyes and choked the lungs. Clara was already in the cockpit of the Cessna, running through her pre-flight check, the instrument panel casting a green glow on her determined face. I stood on the wing, shouting over the noise of the idling engine and the approaching fire. Fly a high pattern first. Give us a map of the fire line, then find those men. Use the landing lights to signal their position to me on the ground. She gave me a sharp nod, her eyes all business. She slid the canopy shut, and the little plane taxied to the end of the dirt strip, its lights cutting a pathetic swath through the thick, swirling smoke. Then, with a roar of the engine, she was off, climbing into the fiery night sky. It was the bravest thing I had ever seen. I jumped into my truck. Leo had loaded the back with fire extinguishers, a chainsaw, and a trauma kit. Good luck, he said, slapping the roof of the truck. Keep the comms open. I nodded and sped off, bouncing down the dirt track toward the ridge road. My tablet was mounted on the dash, displaying the feed from one of the small quadcopter drones. Ben was piloting it from the ranch house, his movements precise and controlled. "Got you, Ethan," his voice came through my earpiece. "Moving ahead of your position." The drone's camera, switched to thermal, showed the world in stark black and white. The fire was a terrifying, pulsing white mass. My truck was a smaller hot signature moving along a thin gray line, the road. "I'm at the ridge," I said, my knuckles white on the steering wheel. The heat was intense even inside the cab. To my left, down the slope, the fire was a solid wall of flame 100 feet high, roaring and crackling. Trees exploded into torches as the fire reached them. It was mesmerizing and horrifying. "Clara, what's your status?" I asked, my voice tight. "I'm at 2,000 feet. Her voice came back, surprisingly calm. "The fire is moving faster than we thought. It's going to jump the creek bed any minute. I'm starting my search pattern for the workers." On my screen, Ben switched the feed to the second drone. "Contact," he said. "I've got them." The drone zoomed in on a small rocky outcrop near the creek, a tiny island in a sea of fire. I could see the heat signatures of 5, maybe 6 people huddled together. The fire had cut them off completely. They had nowhere to go. "Clara, did you copy?" I yelled. "I see them," she confirmed. "I'm going in." A moment later, I saw it. The brilliant, piercing light of the Cessna's landing lights cut down through the smoke, illuminating the trapped men. They looked up, their faces pale with terror and hope. They were alive. Now we just had to keep them that way. "Ben, find me a path," I said. "I'm too far up the ridge." Ben's drone dipped and weaved, scouting the terrain between me and the trapped workers. "Negative, Ethan. The whole slope is on fire. You can't get down there. It's a no-go." My heart sank. We could see them. We could talk to them. But I couldn't reach them. "Stand by," Clara's voice cut in. "I have an idea. Ethan, get back to the airstrip now." "What are you doing?" I demanded, turning the truck around, tires spinning in the dirt. "I'm landing," she said. "Not on the strip. On the ridge road. Right where you are." I slammed on the brakes. "That's insane. It's not long enough. It's not wide enough. It's on fire." "It's our only shot," she said, her voice leaving no room for argument. "Get clear. I need every inch." I didn't argue. I drove the truck as far off the narrow road as I could, pushing it into the brush on the side away from the fire. I jumped out and turned on every light the truck had, pointing them down the road to give her a makeshift runway. Through the smoke, I saw her. The Cessna was coming in low and fast, flaps down, landing lights blazing. The fire was licking at the edge of the road. Embers the size of my fist were skipping across the asphalt. She was flying into hell. The plane hit the ground hard, bounced once, and then settled, the tires screeching as she slammed on the brakes. The wingtip cleared my truck by what felt like inches. The plane rolled to a stop less than 50 feet from where the road crumbled away into a fiery gulch. It was the most incredible piece of flying I had ever witnessed. I ran to the plane as she killed the engine. "We're going to have to walk them out," she said, already unbuckling. "The drones will guide us." The next 20 minutes were a blur of heat, smoke, and adrenaline. Guided by Ben on the drone, we scrambled down a rocky draw that was somehow, miraculously, still untouched by the fire. We found the workers. They were coughing, terrified, but alive. We got them back up to the plane, one by one. There was no room for me. "Get them out of here," I yelled to Clara over the rising roar of the flames. "I'll find another way." She just looked at me, then nodded. She loaded the last man in, climbed into the pilot's seat, and fired up the engine. She took off, climbing steeply to get above the smoke, and banked towards the safety of our ranch. I stood there on the burning ridge, alone, and watched her fly away. I had never been prouder or more terrified in my entire life. Standing on that ridge with the fire raging below and the sound of Clara's Cessna fading into the smoke-choked sky was a strange moment of clarity. The immediate crisis of the rescue was over. The workers were safe. Clara was safe. Now it was just me and the fire. I had my radio, my wits, and a deep-seated refusal to die on my own property. The fire had already jumped the ridge road behind me, cutting off my retreat. The way I had come was gone. I was, for all intents and purposes, as trapped as the men we had just rescued. But panic is a choice. I chose to work the problem. I pulled up the drone feed on my phone. The battery was low, but it still worked. "Ben, what's my best way out?" I asked into my radio. The creek, his voice came back, tiny and distant. The fire's moving west, away from the eastern bend. If you can get down to the water, you can follow it downstream back toward the ranch. It'll be a wet walk, but it's your only shot. The scramble down to Coyote Creek was treacherous. The ground was hot, and the air was so thick with smoke I could barely see my own feet. But Ben guided me, his drone a guardian angel hovering just overhead, its camera finding the safest path. The water of the creek was a shock, cool and life-giving. I waded into the thigh-deep current, the smoke thinning as I moved away from the main fire front. As I trudged through the water, my mind shifted from survival to evidence. The fire was Victoria Vance's ultimate gambit, but it was also her biggest mistake. A fire this large, this hot, this fast. It leaves a story written on the land, a story that our technology was perfectly suited to read. "Clara," I said into the radio, "are you back on the ground?" "Affirmative," she replied. "Workers are safe. Leo and Mike are giving them water. Doc Morales is on his way over. His cousin is a deputy and gave him an escort through a back gate. How are you?" "I'm fine. I need you to get the big drone back up. The thermal imager. I want you to fly a slow, methodical grid pattern over the entire burn area, starting at the point of origin." "Copy that," she said. "What are we looking for?" "The narrative," I said. "A fire tells you how it was born. I want to see the heat signatures. An accidental fire, like from a cigarette, starts small and spreads out in a fan shape with the wind. Arson with an accelerant blooms. It starts hot and fast, a big, sudden explosion of heat. I want that signature recorded." For the next hour, as I made my way back to the ranch house through the blackened, smoldering landscape, Clara and Ben worked the drones. They were no longer rescue tools. They were forensic instruments. The big drone, flying high, captured the macro story, the overall burn pattern, the speed of the fire's spread, the unnatural shape of its birth near the workers' camp. The smaller drone, piloted by Ben, went low. It hovered over the spot where we had first seen the fire erupt. Even hours later, the ground there was significantly hotter than the surrounding areas. The thermal camera showed a distinct, multi-lobed pattern, like someone had poured out cans of gasoline in several spots and lit them all at once. It wasn't just a bloom, it was a calculated detonation. By the time I stumbled out of the woods near the barn, covered in soot and smelling of smoke, the worst of the fire had passed us by, continuing its destructive march west. My crew had saved the house and the barn. The airstrip was secure. The rescued workers were sitting in stunned silence, wrapped in blankets. Sheriff Frank Miller was there, his face grim. He had finally made it through. He just looked at me, shook his head, and said, "You've had a busy night, Ethan." "You have no idea," I said. Then I showed him the tablet with the drone footage. I showed him the thermal image of the ignition point. I showed him the recording of the men planting the bag by my fence hours earlier. I showed him the live feed from neighbor Walt's channel, where half the county had watched us pull Victoria Vance's abandoned employees out of a fire she had set while her trucks blocked the fire department. The final piece of the puzzle fell into place the next morning. Once the area was safe, I walked the site of the ignition point with Frank. The ground was blackened and scorched. The air still smelled of chemicals. And there, lying in the ash, were the melted remains of several plastic containers, the kind that held gasoline or diesel. Near them, we found the remnants of a road flare, the kind used as an ignition source. It was sloppy. It was arrogant. Victoria's crew, in their rush to create a clean-up fire, had left behind a signed confession. The fuel residue was all over the soil. It would be simple for a lab to match it to the type of accelerant used. Public opinion, which Victoria had so carefully cultivated, had already flipped. Thanks to neighbor Walt's broadcast, we weren't paranoid recluses. We were the ones who ran into the fire while the HOA president who started it was probably sleeping in her bed. Her carefully constructed media spin about community improvement and safety had died in the smoke. The evidence wasn't just in our flight logs or on our servers. It was in the sky, on the ground, and in the minds of every person who had watched the drama unfold on their screens. She wanted a war. She had no idea we would bring our own air force, our own intelligence, and our own damn news network. The courtroom was cold, sterile, a world away from the heat and chaos of the fire. Victoria Vance sat at the defendant's table, looking every bit the poised, powerful executive. She wore an expensive suit. Her hair was perfect, and she projected an aura of calm, aggrieved innocence. She was trying to sell the jury the same charm she had sold the community. Her defense was simple and, on the surface, plausible. It was a tragic accident. Her safety team, she claimed, was performing a routine cleanup of construction debris when a spark from a faulty piece of equipment ignited the dry grass. It was an unforeseen act of God, amplified by the unfortunate high winds. She was the victim here, her ambitious community project now in ruins, her reputation unfairly tarnished by a vindictive rancher with a grudge. She looked at me from across the room, her eyes conveying a mix of pity and contempt. It was a masterful performance. It was also a complete lie, and we were about to tear it down piece by piece. Our lawyer, a sharp, no-nonsense guy named Mark, started methodically. He didn't begin with the fire. He began with the motive. He put the county registrar on the stand and, using magnified projections, showed the jury the two different plat maps. He had a document expert testify that the newer map, the one with the easement, showed clear signs of digital forgery. The font used for the easement description didn't exist when my granddad was alive. Strike one. He then brought in a financial analyst who had subpoenaed the HOA's books. The analyst walked the jury through a labyrinth of inflated invoices, payments to shell corporations, and missing funds, all pointing to the spa and clubhouse project being a massive fraud, a way for Victoria to embezzle money for her political campaign. Strike two. Her composure started to fray at the edges, a slight tightening of her jaw, a flicker of something cold in her eyes. Then came the fire. Mark called Sheriff Frank Miller to the stand. Frank, in his simple, honest way, described the blocked fire roads, the HOA compliance trucks that refused to move, and the hours it took for emergency services to reach the scene. He testified about the county-wide burn ban that had been in effect for a month. Starting any kind of fire for any reason was illegal. Accident or not, a crime had been committed. Then Mark played the first video. It was the footage from my fence camera showing her man planting the bag on my property. The jury was mesmerized. He followed it with the thermal drone footage of the two men retreating into the woods. He was establishing a pattern of criminal behavior by her employees on that specific night. The main event was Clara's testimony. She took the stand not as a rancher's wife, but as a licensed pilot and a certified drone operator. She was calm, articulate, and unshakable. Mark had her walk the jury through the flight logs from our Cessna, timestamped and verified by the FAA. The logs documented the rescue flight, the insane landing on the Ridge Road, and the evacuation of the 5 workers. Then she explained the drone telemetry data. On the big screen, the jury saw the fire not as a chaotic mess, but as a set of data points. She showed them the thermal signature of the ignition, the massive, instantaneous bloom of heat. She overlaid it with a simulation of a typical brush fire, which started small and grew slowly. The two images couldn't have been more different. One is an accident, Clara said, her voice clear and steady. The other is an explosion. Our data shows an explosion. The final witness was the lead foreman of the construction crew, one of the men we had rescued. He was nervous, but his anger at being left for dead was stronger than his fear of Victoria. He testified that Victoria herself had called him that evening. He said she was furious about the project being halted. She told him to clean up the mess and create a diversion so the sheriff would have bigger problems to deal with than her construction permit. He admitted that one of his men, following her vague but threatening instructions, used gasoline and a flare to start a small, controllable fire that was meant to be a distraction. But the wind took it, and it became an inferno. He told the jury how they had been trapped, how they had watched Victoria's own trucks blockade their only escape route, and how the only people who came for them were the very ones they had been sent to harass. When he was done, there was a dead silence in the courtroom. All eyes turned to Victoria Vance. The mask was gone. The charm had evaporated. Her face was a pale, tight mask of pure fury and disbelief. She had been so sure of her power, so confident in her ability to manipulate the truth. She had underestimated us. She thought we were just dumb ranchers. She didn't realize she was picking a fight with a battle-tested, tech-savvy family who knew how to document every move she made. In court, her charisma and her lies were no match for our flight logs, our drone data, and the simple, powerful truth. Her lawyer meekly said, "The defense rests." It was over. The jury was out for less than an hour. Guilty on all counts: arson, fraud, reckless endangerment, conspiracy. As they led her away, her eyes met mine one last time. There was no pity in them now, just pure, unadulterated hatred. I felt nothing, just a quiet, weary satisfaction. The fire was finally out. The sentencing was 2 weeks later. Victoria Vance traded her power suit for a drab county jumpsuit. The judge, a stern woman with a reputation for being tough but fair, didn't mince words. She spoke of the arrogance, the greed, and the chilling disregard for human life. Victoria was sentenced to a significant prison term, long enough for her political ambitions to wither and die on the vine. The two men who lit the fire got lesser sentences for their cooperation. The HOA was dissolved by court order, its fraudulent finances handed over to a receiver. But for us, the most important part of the sentence wasn't the prison time. It was the restitution. The judge ordered Victoria to pay for the full cost of the firefighting efforts and for the damages to our neighbors' properties. And then came the part that truly mattered. She was ordered to fund a complete habitat restoration plan for the 300 acres of my land that had been destroyed. The plan was to be drafted by the state's top ecologists. And, in a move that made my lawyer smile, the judge ruled that the execution of that plan, every contract signed, every dollar spent, was to be done under the direct oversight and approval of one Ethan Hayes. Me. Justice, it turned out, wasn't just about punishment. It was about restoration. She had to pay to rebuild everything she had tried to burn down, and I would be her new boss for the entire project. The irony was so thick you could cut it with a knife. The first truckloads of saplings arrived a few months later. They weren't the mighty 80-year-old oaks my granddad had planted. They were whips, barely taller than my son, Jack, but they were a start. The kids were back home, the fear and tension slowly fading from our lives. Lily, my daughter, was in charge of the planting grid, using a GPS app on her tablet to make sure each tree was perfectly spaced. Jack's job was to give each new tree its first bucket of water. Clara was there, of course, directing the volunteers. The news of the trial, of the rescue, of what Victoria had done, it had spread through the county like the fire itself. People we barely knew showed up to help. Neighbor Walt was there, handing out water bottles and telling anyone who would listen how he'd broadcast the whole thing. Mike, Leo, and Ben were there, their quiet competence now focused on digging holes instead of watching perimeters. We started in the South Belt, right where the bulldozer had torn through. We were replanting the line of sentinels. I dug a hole in the dark, rich soil, the smell of earth and hope replacing the memory of smoke and ash. I lowered a young oak into the ground, its roots dangling, and packed the dirt around it. My granddad was gone, but the legacy he started was right here in my hands. He believed that land wasn't something you owned. It was something you cared for, something you defended. I looked up at my family, my friends, my neighbors, all working together under the big Texas sky. We had been tested. We had been pushed to the very edge. The question of how far a man will go to defend his own had been answered. You go as far as you have to. You use the tools you have, whether it's a shotgun, a drone, a Cessna, or just the stubborn refusal to break. The town remembered. They remembered the smoke, and they remembered the glow of the landing lights in the night. They remembered who blocked the roads and who flew into the flames. Victoria Vance had wanted to be a county commissioner. She wanted her name on a plaque. And in a way, she got her legacy. Every time the wind rustles the leaves of these new, young oaks, it'll be a reminder. A reminder of the woman who lit the match and the community that fought the fire. I looked out over the rolling hills of my home. Our home. Scarred, but not broken. The land was healing. So were we. We had held the line. We had won.